there's always one slippery little customer. Toads tend to be nocturnal wherever they live, but there are some creatures of the night who, when they live on the coast, become creatures of the day. To find them, I'm heading right to the far north of the country.
Shetland has more than its fair share of coastline, 900 miles in all, composed of rocky crags and little inlets. If you wanted to walk all round it, it'd take you weeks and weeks. It's washed by the cold waters of the Atlantic and the North Sea, creating this bleak but beautiful landscape. And yet it's home to one of Britain's most elusive animals. Elsewhere, you'd seldom see it by day, and even here, you've got to have a keen eye and a back of patience.
It's one of the few creatures that's as happy on land as it is in water.
There it is, an otter, a mother with her cub. The story is that they came here, introduced by the Vikings, and they've lasted ever since, so they've got pretty good squatters' rights on us all. They're on the move. I suppose they get many days like this to sunbathe. And after you've sunbathed, well, fancy a swim, don't you? To get within 100 yards of two otters who don't know you're there. Forget your big game in Africa. This'll do me nicely.
Otters like to catch their prey by surprise. Inland, where otters live on rivers, they tend to hunt at night when the fish they eat are sleeping. But here, on the coast, some fish rest during the day, so otters are out and about hunting during daylight hours.
We've always had a love affair with the otter, whether or not it's just because it's such a beautiful animal or because it has such an expressive face, I don't know. But the good news is that otters are becoming more common throughout mainland Britain, so perhaps sights like this will become more frequent. But from my point of view, it can't be more special. Between them, the sun and the moon drive the rhythm of life along the coast, whether it's the cycle of night and day or the rising and falling of the tide. But the sun has another and even more important role to play. And the evidence for that is about to emerge all around me.
The sun's energy is the fuel of life, on our coast just as in the rest of Britain, and it's plants that harness that energy.
The result in the month of May is a cliff top that's as bright as any garden. Sheets and sheets of bright yellow bird's foot trefoil and horseshoe vetch, perforated with the delicate white flowers of the sea campion. And then clump after clump of sea pinks, also known as thrift. Do you remember it used to be on the back of the old threepenny bit? Called thrift, I think, because it can make do with very, very little soil in the crevices among these rocks. It's a sight that gladden anybody's heart, but all these plants and flowers are also vital for wildlife.
Having captured the sun's energy, they pass it on to insects. And insects pass it on to birds. As any schoolboy knows, it's a classic food chain. And though we can't see it as clearly, exactly the same process is happening underwater. Seaweeds aren't plants in the true sense of the word, but they harness the sun's energy in much the same way. Look at this lot over here. Instead of roots, they've got a holdfast which enables them to cling onto the rocks, and then the foliage floats ever upwards towards the sun, held by these gas-filled bladders. We have over 800 different kinds of seaweed in such varied shapes and colours that they can be as beautiful as any garden on land. But even seaweeds aren't the most important part of this underwater food chain. That distinction belongs to another group of sun lovers that are far stranger and much harder to spot than seaweed. These tiny green jewels are phytoplankton, and there are billions of them in our oceans. Feeding on them, rather like cows grazing on grass, is a whole array of microscopic animals called zooplankton. Together, they form the basis of a food chain which has Britain's coastal waters teeming with an incredibly rich variety of life. Weighing in at 300 kilograms, you might think that the grey seal is top of Britain's underwater food chain, but occasionally, just off the coast of Scotland, they're dwarfed by a much larger and more famous predator. These are the true lords of our seas. And they're hungry. The grey seals are a favourite prey. Killer whales are on the prowl. As the seals head for the rocks in safety, the whales try to block their escape. Choosing a victim, they work together to close the net. It's an astonishing spectacle, and who'd have thought you could watch killer whales hunting right next to the British coast? And there are other creatures in our coastal waters just as extraordinary, but to see them you have to go a long, long way out to sea. Funnily enough, to a place where the sun doesn't shine.
I'm heading out northeast from Aberdeen on the northeast coast of Scotland for about 100 miles out into the open ocean. But these seas are still an important part of our natural British environment. We're, if you like, responsible for them. And yet we know so little of what they contain.
Now, somewhere here, there's a landing site. There she is, Transocean Sedco 712. And am I pleased to get here? An oil rig is an amazing feat of human ingenuity and engineering. Some of the technology used here has given us an insight into parts of the natural world that we would otherwise never have seen.
To keep an eye on the wellhead and the pipework hundreds of feet below, the rig uses an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle. This yellow thing here, it's basically a miniature submarine armed with lights and cameras. And it's what those cameras can see that I've come here to look at today.
I'll get a better view from the control room.
We're about 200 feet down now, nothing much at the moment except the bubbles. Probably going too fast to see much at the moment, aren't I? Zooming past light.
It's just a bit murky as well.
This is the North Sea, not the Caribbean. Exciting this, isn't it? Because you just don't know what you're going to find.
Okay, that's a stop just there. Speed limit, please.
It's just like space exploration in its way, isn't it? In my imagination, there's something coming out of the gloom in the middle there.
Sun's coming out of the gloom.
What this camera and others like it around the North Sea have picked up are some quite extraordinary images of creatures living in the murky depths. It's a privileged view of some alien-looking beings few people have ever seen, but they're all part of our British wildlife. Back on terra firma, this is more like the seaside I love, and you just can't beat it. We Brits are drawn to it like magnets to soak up some rays, take a swim, generally relax and recharge. But beneath this holiday resort is something created by another vital force of nature.
This is Southport in Merseyside, one of Britain's first coastal resorts. People have been flocking here in their millions since the end of the 18th century, and I bet you anything you like, quite a few of them complain about the wind. But if it weren't for wind, Southport wouldn't exist. You see, this is all built on sand dunes, and sand dunes are formed by wind.
And boy, is there a lot of it. To build really good dunes, you need a gently shelving shore, acres of sand, and, of course, lots of wind. It's once the sand's dried out that the wind can really get to work. At a critical speed, it starts to carry the sand up the beach. And it does so by a fascinating process.
It's happening here, right now. The wind picks up a single grain of sand, carries it for a few feet, then as it drops onto the beach, so it dislodges several more grains of sand. They fly up, and as they land, they dislodge even more, starting this enormous chain reaction until, as you can see, the entire beach is on the move, and it'll continue to move until it hits a stationary object. When that happens, it starts to build up and it turns into a sand dune.
But the wind can't build a full-size sand dune alone. It works in partnership with some highly specialised plants.
First into the fray is this one, sea rocket. It's fast growing, it has to be here. It's tolerant of salt water, even its seeds can float, but it's not terribly tall growing, which means that the little dunes around this can only make it to about a foot. To get that little bit higher, they need a plant that's capable of growing taller and which has a dense root system, and that's this, couch grass. Now the dunes are what they call embryo dunes, growing 5 feet high, but they can get bigger.
And for that, they need the help of one more plant.
And this is it, marram grass, capable of surviving in the teeth of a maritime gale. Its roots go down for several yards, and its top growth is capable of piercing 3 feet of sand dumped on top of it. Try doing that to your back lawn. These dunes can last for decades.
Gradually, they become more stable, ultimately creating new land. And new life moves in. Arctic terns fly all the way from Antarctica to nest in our sand dunes. Making their nests on the ground, they use these dune grasses to hide their young chicks from the prying eyes of gulls and foxes. But if you're tiny, living in these windswept dunes isn't so easy. Some bees lead solitary lives, and the females build nests in small holes in wood or rocks. But here on these dunes, both are in short supply. So one species of bee has come up with an ingenious solution. Scattered all around are hundreds of empty snail shells. And for a female snail bee, they make the perfect seaside home. After selecting a shell, she gathers nesting material, rather like a bird. She chews up bits of leaf to make a soft pulp, then uses this to line the inside of the shell. Then she collects pollen and nectar to provide food for her larvae when they hatch. After laying her eggs, she seals the shell and flies off to begin all over again. This clever little bee can nest in as many as 5 different shells in a season. She gets my vote for the busiest bee in Britain.
Wind and sand gives us sand dunes, creating new land along our coastline. But wind and water combine to make a completely different coastal feature. Waves.
Waves are made as wind ripples the surface of the ocean. The really big ones we get have swept across the Atlantic, growing up to 30 feet high. And it's the coasts of southwest Britain that feel their greatest force. They make the coves, the headlands and the caves for which this coastline is famous.
There are salty tales of the sea from times gone by that tell of sailors being lured toward the rocks by the calls of mermaids, beckoning them to an early grave. The mermaids may have been imagined, but those sounds most certainly were not. This looks like a passageway to the centre of the earth. It's carved out by thousands of years of wave activity. You do get a distinct feeling that you're being watched. The deeper you get into the cave, the more that strange sound gets closer. It's a baby grey seal. Perhaps just 2 or 3 days old, no more. And its mother's left it in the safety of the cave while she goes off to feed. She suckles it for about 18 days. Insatiable appetite then. During which time its body weight increases dramatically. And after that time, she pushes off and it's left to fend for itself. It really is a case of sink or swim. Amazing sight. Good luck. Time will empty to leather.
One way or another, wave power has a big influence in shaping the lives of coastal wildlife. But this destructive power isn't just making caves. It's constantly re-sculpting our coastline, creating many of our best-known landmarks. From the chalk cliffs of Dover to the towering granite crags of Scotland, you'll see a landscape carved by the power of wind and waves. And these cliffs give us something else for which the British coastline is justly famous. Millions of nesting seabirds. Lee is on St Kilda, in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, the remotest part of the British Isles. For a few months in summer, Britain is home to the largest colony of gannets in the world. For them, our cliffs make the perfect home. Up here, they're safe from predators, and right on their doorstep, there's miles and miles of water packed with food. Because deep-sea fishing is just what these birds are designed for. From way up in the sky, they lock in on their underwater prey. Then, like living torpedoes, they slam into the water at speeds of around 75 miles an hour. Soon they'll head back out to sea, and the sound of nesting gannets on these cliffs will be a distant memory, at least until next year.
If you had to choose just one place that summed up the elemental nature of Britain's coastline, then this estuary at Snettisham on the Norfolk coast would be a pretty strong contender. The deadly power of the tide is never far away, and in this huge open space, there's no hiding place from the sun, the wind and the waves. And yet this place owes its existence not to these, but to the last of our forces of nature, the rain.
But it's not the rain falling on the coast that matters. It's the rain falling much further inland. The fresh water that rain brings to the British Isles is absolutely vital. All across the countryside, rain drains into streams, streams into small rivers, and small rivers into big rivers. And it's in estuaries, where rivers meet the sea, that most of the rains end up.
And they bring with them this. Mud. An accumulation of huge quantities of soil and silt washed downriver by rainwater. And it might look very pretty, but it's packed full of food. And that makes our estuaries one of the most fertile places on Earth. But if this is so full of food, why is it so empty?
Well, much of the life here lives in rather than on the mud. If you dig down, you'll find it chock full of highly specialised creatures. Mud shrimp and ragworms and billions of tiny snails. Because these specialists can tolerate the mix of fresh water and seawater, they have the mud all to themselves. Except when the tide's out.
There are some hunters that come specially equipped to winkle their prey from the mud. At first glance you can't see anything at all, but then with a pair of binoculars, when you get your eye in, you will see them rather like wildebeests scattered across the Serengeti. Thousands and thousands of birds.
In fact, millions of birds come to overwinter in our estuaries, and for them, this mud is a gastronomic treat. There are bills of all shapes and sizes to probe beneath the mud. The curlews is long and curved and sinks deep into the burrows of lugworms. The redshanks has sensitive nerve endings to pick up minute vibrations below the surface. While the heavy dagger-like beak of the oyster catcher is perfect for spearing ragworms. They all feed as quickly as they can, because it's not long before the tide turns once more. As it covers their feeding grounds, the birds are forced closer and closer to land, finding safety in numbers as they wait for the tide to retreat again. Funny really, isn't it, that when you come to the coast, all you really want is sunshine. And yet, It's the wind, the rain, the tide and the sun all working together that actually make it a place worth visiting, and one of the richest and most rewarding landscapes of the British Isles.
The North Antrim coast is simply stunning, and if the view is world class, so too is the sea life here. It's also a playground for children of all ages. People have been surfing for thousands of years, but as long as it would take me to get as good as those guys. I love bodyboarding here on the North Antrim coast. It's one of my favourite places, and with more and more of us coming here to the seaside, there's an increasing need to protect this environment, both for ourselves and the wildlife we share it with. Irish surfing champion Andy Hill lives in Portrush and is passionate about the marine environment and the wildlife on his doorstep.
Everyone gets a huge buzz when they see a dolphin or a porpoise, and of course if you're in the water and they're very close, I mean I've surfed with them almost as close to you, and you can actually see the porpoise is actually swimming in between the surfers.
Do you have much problems here with litter? Because I know that it is a problem along the coast generally.
Obviously during the summer when there's thousands of people here, and you've got people that obviously don't care and they come down and smash bottles, throw away their takeaway boxes, you know, they have no respect for the ocean environment or the beach environment.
Andy does more than just talk about the environment. He's also prepared to get his hands dirty, helping out at a beach tidy. And he's roped me in too.
Okay folks, you want to gather on a wee bit closer and we can see as we have to shout and scream. And some of you have heard me.
Residents from Port Ballantrae are being marshalled by Jim Allen from Coleraine Borough Council.
And we're going to be working in teams. And
Jim
groups.
says every piece of litter that's lifted is one less potential danger to wildlife.
General Rubbish, are you ready?
Jim, this is an astonishing array of stuff which has come off a tiny wee corner of a beach. Just think what it would be like right across Northern Ireland.
This is just a snapshot.
Yeah.
I'm afraid the whole of Northern Irish coastline is like this. If we just dived in, this is a useful material and it's used to pack your computer and your television, keep it safe. But unfortunately, the thing about polystyrene in this particular environment is that it does this and breaks down into these little tiny individual balls. And if you were a fish or if you were a bird, you would look at that and think, yes, tasty meal. That's some crustacea, some fish eggs, whatever, and you would attempt to eat that. So polystyrene, it just adds to this litany, this cocktail of potentially lethal litter. We've actually got waste here on the north coast of Ireland that comes from North America, Canada, and we do this sort of trade with each other, a national trade in our litter and debris. These particular bracelets come from Canada and Newfoundland. They're part of the lobster and the crab fishing industry. And it's not that they're particularly harmful at all. An animal or a bird could easily get inside that there and knock it back out again, and it's a death sentence to them. But it's just an idea of how this litter, we just trade it with each other all around the world.
The North Antrim coast is among the richest and most beautiful marine habitats in Europe. But with more and more litter washing around our shores, it's vitally important we clean up our act.
A plastic bag can take up to 20 years to disappear, but this plastic bottle can last hundreds, if not thousands. And one cigarette butt can be here for 12 years. That means this stuff lasts a long time, looks horrible, and is a real and present danger to wildlife.
People are passionate about coastal creatures. The kittiwakes and razorbills, porpoises and seals. It's such a beautiful environment and they want to keep it that way.
Darren goes in general. That's general rubbish.
Yeah, general rubbish indeed. Now, do you ever think really, cheers, you ever think that you've got no real chance of making a difference on something like this?
And if people don't stop putting it there, there's a cigarette lighter.
Yeah.
If they don't stop putting it there, you're just sort of uncovering more and more.
It's just horrible. I think what you're sitting inside and it's just not very nice, and it's a lot better just to pick it up and reuse it, put it in the bin.
I want to walk in a clean, free environment. And so if I can take my litter home, why can't everybody else?
This coastline attracts some very shy visitors, and volunteers with the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group are experts at spotting them. Up on Ramore Head in Portrush is a great place to start.
Helen, this is your patch,
It is.
and you know it well.
Yes, it's close to home, so I can get here very quickly.
Just in that wee bit of a glassy spot.
When Clara's off school, she will come with me sometimes to Ramore Head, where we will do a watch once a month. I have seen bottlenose dolphins and harbour porpoise up here.
And Clara?
I've seen harbour porpoises.
Dolphin on occasion, bottlenose dolphins just the once, and minke whale. That has been all I have seen.
Really?
So
Mickey's
far.
from here?
Yes, but now very rarely, very rarely.
This is the first time I've been out. It's going to have appreciation of the wildlife that's in the local area, and also I suppose it helps in terms of counting numbers, and having to get an idea of population size.
The coast's coming under increasing amount of pressure, both from recreation and from development and all sorts of things. So before we can allow any of that to happen, we need to know exactly what's happening there.
Visitors drop in from all over the place.
This is fantastic, getting this close to wild geese. These are Irish Brent geese and they've just come in from Iceland, and that's the magical thing about being out here on a beach. You never know who you're going to meet.
And above White Rocks, I find another whale watcher. Gary Burrows is spotting even more porpoises.
Most people, even those who live and work on the coast, are unaware that we have a third of the world's species of whales, dolphins and porpoises, just like this little guy, the harbour porpoise, the smallest of those cetaceans.
Birds diving in can often be a clue to dolphins or porpoise feeding underneath. Any other tips?
Most of the time you're looking for a glint, perhaps of the sun, off the wet back of a dolphin. You might pick up what looks like a bubble or a flat patch in the water, and that's called a fluke print, a bit like a footprint on the water, just where an animal has surfaced and dived under.
Why do you want more volunteers?
It's very, very difficult to establish whether a population, for example of bottlenose dolphins, is in trouble and declining or very buoyant and going up. We need to be able to join the dots. We need the eyes and ears of everybody who's playing around the water.
We're incredibly lucky. The seas around Northern Ireland are among the richest and most beautiful in the world. So remember, the next time you're on a beach, leave nothing but footprints, take nothing but photographs, and waste nothing but time. And if you want to get involved in some of the projects that are happening on your stretch of the coastline, here's how to do it. I'm off to catch a few waves. This autumn, why not celebrate the return of thousands of Irish Brent geese back to Strangford Lough from the high Canadian Arctic? And you can help them by volunteering with the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. Our shores have witnessed many invasions, and litter is just the latest. You can help fight back by signing up for a beach tidy with a local council or the National Trust. Strangford Lough is our only marine nature reserve, and Explorus our only sea aquarium. They need volunteers too, so if you're interested, check out the Explorus website.
If you've enjoyed getting to know Britain's coastal wildlife, why not visit some of the places we've featured on the programme? Or you can do your bit to help by joining our Breathing Places campaign. You'll find all the information you need on our website, bbc.co.uk/Nature of Britain. You can also get a free BBC Open University calendar from your local library, featuring seasonal activities and events all over the country.
Next time on The Nature of Britain, we enter a world of strange shapes and mysterious beasts, where animals hide among gnarled branches and forest mists, where giants depend on the infinitesimally small, and butterflies feast on a rain of sugar. So if you go down to the woods next time, you'll be sure of a big surprise in the nature of woodland Britain.
On BBC 4 now, more coastal wildlife in Cornwall and dolphins off Scotland. In The Nature of Britain, a user's guide. And Britain's landscape and wildlife are celebrated in a BBC book written by Alan Titchmarsh to accompany the series. Later on BBC One, season ticket profiles rugby prop Simon Best. That's tonight at 10:45.